London, 1884. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and yet Duke Lorenzo Lang stepped out of his carriage without hesitation. Boots splashed into the muck outside Baron Frederick Hackerfick's estate. But Lorenzo didn't flinch. He was not here for comfort. He was here for a bride. The butler swung the heavy oak door open. "The Baron is expecting you, Your Grace." Inside, Baron Frederick waited, his waistcoat too tight, his smile stretched wider than necessary. He bowed low, but his eyes glinted with calculation. "Your Grace, an honor, as always. Let's keep to business," Lorenzo replied. He was not a man for pleasantries. 36, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed. His presence filled the room as neatly as the ticking of the clock above the mantel. "The agreement stands." Frederick clasped his hands. "Indeed. My younger daughter, Faith, is prepared. The dowry, well, I trust the funds are in order?" Lorenzo gave a curt nod. "The sum will be transferred tomorrow. Tonight, I meet my bride." Frederick's smile twitched. Of course. He clapped his hands. The door opened. A young woman entered, her gown modest, her expression unreadable.
The chapel smelled of roses and candle wax. Guests craned their necks, eager to glimpse the Duke's young bride. Whispers rustled like silk across the pews. Lorenzo Lange stood at the altar, jaw set. He had paid dearly for this match. A duchess was expected. Beauty, youth, and the promise of heirs. That was the bargain. The doors opened. The bride entered. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. Not Faith. The woman walking toward him was older. Dark eyes steady, mouth pressed firm. Hope Hackerfick, the eldest. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lorenzo's pulse thundered. He looked past her to Baron Frederick, who smiled as though nothing were amiss. A trick. A public humiliation. The bride reached him and curtsied. "Your Grace." Lorenzo did not answer. For a heartbeat, the air froze. His hands curled at his sides. He could end this now. Turn, walk away, leave the Baron disgraced, his daughters ruined. His pride screamed at him to do it. The priest cleared his throat. The guests shifted. Every eye in London's high society was on him. If he left, he would not just wound the Hackerficks, he would brand himself a man without honor, one who broke vows before they were spoken. The Duke who ran. Slowly, Lorenzo extended his hand. His voice was like iron scraped against stone. "Very well." Hope placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cool, her chin lifted high. She knew he had nearly walked away. The vows began. And with each word, Lorenzo felt the cage of duty closing around him, tighter than any prison walls. In the carriage ride home, silence stretched between them. Rain struck the windows like needles. Finally, Lorenzo spoke. This was not the agreement. Hope turned her face to the glass. "I am aware." "You did not protest?" Her voice was low but steady. "Would it have mattered? My father's word outweighs mine." He studied her. The faint curve of her jaw, the stubborn tilt of her mouth. Not beautiful like her sister, no, but striking. Still, his words were cold. "Then we are both prisoners of his ambition." Hope did not answer. She folded her hands in her lap and sat tall, refusing to shrink. At the estate. The Duke's London estate loomed dark against the storm. Servants lined the hall, bowing as the newlyweds entered. "This is your home now," Lorenzo said, his tone clipped. "You will manage it as a duchess should." Hope's chin lifted. "I will do my duty, Your Grace." He paused, eyes narrowing at her poise. Most women flinched beneath his gaze. She did not. Without another word, he turned and strode toward his study, leaving her alone beneath the grand chandelier. The servants whispered as they dispersed. The wrong bride, but a duchess nonetheless. Later that night, Frederick Hackerfick raised a glass of brandy in his study. Alone, smug. His scheme had succeeded. One daughter married to a duke, one dowry secured. But he was not done. Faith was still unmarried, and the duke was still wealthy. If Frederick played his cards right, he could demand another dowry and perhaps find a second nobleman desperate enough to pay it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Faith stood there, pale and trembling. "Father," she whispered, "how could you do this to Hope?" Frederick smiled thinly. "My dear child, everything I do for the family, and soon it will be your turn." The first week of marriage passed in silence. Hope Hackerfick, now Duchess of Lang, woke each morning in a chamber as wide as her father's entire hall, its windows draped in velvet that shut out the London sun. She ate her meals alone, managed the servants alone, walked the gardens alone. Her husband was nowhere to be found. Whenever she asked the butler, the answer was the same. "His Grace is occupied." It became clear soon enough what that meant. Duke Lorenzo Lange had not married her in spirit, only in name. On the 7th morning, she sat at the long dining table, a single cup of tea before her. At last she heard footsteps echoing on the marble floor. He entered in his riding coat, gloves in hand, hair damp from the morning drizzle. 36, broad-shouldered, unyielding. He looked like a man carved from iron. "Your Grace," she said politely as she rose. He inclined his head but did not sit. "You are awake early. I rise with the sun. Would you care for breakfast?" He shook his head. "I prefer to ride on an empty stomach." The silence stretched, heavy as the rain outside. Hope folded her hands in her lap. "You have avoided me." His gaze sharpened. "I have avoided scandal. That is all." She held his eyes, refusing to lower hers. "Scandal is already upon us. Society whispers every hour of the day. Do you think hiding will silence them?" For the first time, something flickered across his face. Surprise that she dared speak so plainly. Yet his voice remained cold. "Do as you will, Duchess. My affairs are my own." And with that, he turned and strode out, leaving her staring at her untouched tea. By the second week, she forced herself into society despite his distance. At a musical on Bond Street, she sat beside the Marchioness of Hawthorne, who leaned close with her jewelled fan. "My dear," the Marchioness whispered, eyes glinting, "we expected Faith, yet here you sit. Did your father force you into this?" Hope's back remained straight, her voice calm. "A duchess is never forced. She accepts her duty." The Marchioness laughed lightly. "So noble. Still, one wonders what the Duke truly thinks of it." Across the room, Lorenzo entered, tall and commanding, drawing every glance. He did not look her way. Instead, he moved to the fireplace, where men gathered to speak of politics. Hope's throat tightened. "The Duke thinks nothing of gossip," she answered, but humiliation burned beneath her skin. That night, when they returned home, she found him in the library with a glass of brandy. The fire lit sharp lines across his face. "Why did you not acknowledge me?" she asked, stepping inside. He did not turn. "You seemed well surrounded." "I was mocked." His shoulders stiffened. "Society mocks everyone. You will survive." Her patience broke. "You think me fragile? I have lived 26 years under my father's hand. I know what it is to endure." He turned at that, his eyes like steel. "Then endure this marriage as well." Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "I will endure it, but I will not vanish. You may treat me as invisible, Your Grace, but I am here. And whether you like it or not, I am your wife." The words hung between them. For a moment it seemed he might answer with fire. Instead, he drained his glass and said quietly, "Then make yourself useful. Manage the household. I have no interest in domestic affairs." And he strode past her, leaving only the scent of brandy and smoke behind. A week later, a letter arrived in Hope's hand. The writing was Faith's. "Dearest sister, I cannot believe what father has done. You were never meant for the Duke, yet here you are. Are you angry with me? I would never have wished this on you. But I must confess, I envy you. For all of London pities me now, left behind, while you sit in the Duke's grand estate. Please visit when you can. I am lonely. Yours, Faith." Hope read the letter 3 times. Her chest ached for her sister, though the words carried their sting. Envy, pity, a reminder that her marriage was seen as theft. That evening she placed the letter on Lorenzo's desk. "My sister writes," she said. He glanced at it but did not touch it. "She will recover." "You do not understand," she pressed. "Faith has been humiliated as well." His eyes hardened. "Faith is not my concern. You are." Her breath caught. For a moment the words sounded like care, though his tone was cold. The following Sunday, she insisted on accompanying him to church. He seemed reluctant, but did not refuse. When they stepped from the carriage, whispers rippled through the congregation. The Duke had appeared at last with his unwanted bride. Hope kept her spine straight, her hand resting lightly on his arm. She would not cower. During the service, a child began to cry. The mother struggled, flushed with embarrassment. Without hesitation, Hope rose, crossed the aisle, and lifted the baby into her arms. She soothed it gently until the wails softened. The congregation watched in silence. From his pew, Lorenzo's eyes rested on her. For once, unreadable. Afterward, as they walked back to the carriage, he spoke at last. "You are fearless." "Not fearless," she replied. "Determined." A faint smile tugged at his lips before vanishing again. For the first time, she wondered if the ice around him might crack. Back at the Hackerfick estate, Baron Frederick sat in his study counting coins. Faith stood before him, arms folded tight. "You humiliated Hope," she said bitterly. "Nonsense," he answered. "She is a duchess now, better than she deserved." "And me?" she demanded. "What of my future?" Frederick leaned back, his grin sly. "Your future will be secured as well. Another match, another dowry, perhaps more profitable than the Duke himself." Faith's face drained of color. "Another dowry. Father, you cannot—" "I can!" he cut in sharply. "The Duke has money, and so do others. You will be my second triumph." Her stomach turned. "Hope will hate you for this." "Hope is already bound," he said. "She has no choice." That night, Hope stood at her window as Lorenzo returned from his ride. Rain soaked his coat, but he moved with the same strength and unyielding pride. For the first time, she felt not only anger toward him, but a sharper, more dangerous curiosity. What lay beneath the armor he wore so tightly? She did not know that at that very hour, her father was already plotting to sell her sister's future for another fortune. The days after the wedding blurred into a pattern of cold civility. Hope played her role, rising early, speaking politely to the servants, receiving callers who stared too long at her ring and whispered when she turned her back. Lorenzo came and went as he pleased. His presence felt more in the sound of his boots on marble than in his words to her. But she could not forget the moment at the altar. The way his jaw had clenched, the silence stretched, the world held still as he considered walking away. Each time she looked at him across a room, she remembered it. He had nearly chosen her ruin over his own pride. One evening she found him in the music room, where the fire had burned low. He sat with a book unopened in his lap. "You despise me," she said quietly. His eyes lifted, sharp and unreadable. "I despise deceit. That was my father's doing, not mine." "You stood there," he said, his voice measured. "You took the vows." Her hands tightened on the back of a chair. "Would you have had me refuse?" A woman's refusal carries no weight. It would only have shamed us both. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he rose, set the book aside, and walked past her without a word. She told herself she would not cry. She had survived 26 years under Baron Frederick's rule. She would survive this too. At the Hackerfick estate, Faith sat before her mirror, turning the pages of the gossip columns. The Duke's bride, a curious substitution. The sketches showed Hope in her wedding gown, Lorenzo's tall figure beside her. The caption beneath one of them read, "Elder sister triumphant, younger sister eclipsed." Faith's jaw tightened. She had been raised to expect admiration. Parties, suitors, dances, all eyes on her. Now, when she walked into a room, she felt the stares cut her differently. Pity, curiosity, sometimes mockery. She flung the paper aside as her father entered. "They laugh at me." Frederick's voice was smooth as ever. "They laugh for now, but soon they will envy you again." "How?" "Your sister's marriage has opened doors," he said. "Lorenzo Langshire is wealthy, but there are others with fortunes yet untapped. Another duke, perhaps a marquis. They will want a bride. And you, my dear, will be that bride." She stared at him, horrified. "Another dowry? You would take money again?" He smiled thinly. "Why not? Your beauty is worth it. A father must secure his children's futures." Faith felt a chill. She remembered Hope's pale face on the wedding day, the silence before Lorenzo had spoken. She whispered, "And if I refuse?" Frederick's eyes hardened. "You will not. You are my daughter." At the Duke's estate, Hope was learning the rhythm of her new life. She walked through the portrait gallery one afternoon, pausing before a painting of a woman with fair hair and delicate features. The plaque beneath read, "Lady Eleanor Lang, 1848 to 1872. The Duke's first betrothed," she realized. The one who had died young. She heard the door open and turned. Lorenzo entered, his expression unreadable as he saw where she stood. "You knew her," Hope said. "I was to marry her," he replied simply. "She died of fever before the vows." Hope's throat tightened. "And since then?" "Since then I have chosen carefully." His eyes met hers, steady. "And been deceived nonetheless." Her voice sharpened. "Do you blame me for living when she did not?" The silence stretched. His jaw tightened, but he did not answer. That night, she dreamed of the chapel again, of him turning away, the crowd gasping, her father sneering. She woke with her heart pounding. The next day, Faith arrived unannounced. She swept into the parlor with a rustle of silks, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with something that looked too much like anger. "Sister," she said, kissing Hope's cheek with practiced sweetness. "How splendid you look." Hope studied her. "Why are you here, Faith?" "I wish to see how you fare." Hope gestured to the gilded room, the servants hovering at a distance. "You see it?" Faith's smile faltered. "I should have been here?" The words landed heavy between them. "You should not envy me," Hope said softly. "This house is a prison. A prison lined with velvet," Faith snapped. "While I sit at home, waiting for Father to barter me away again." Hope reached for her hand, but Faith pulled back. "You stole my future, Hope, whether you meant to or not." When she was gone, Hope sat in silence, her chest aching. She had gained a title, a house, a husband, and lost her sister. Later that evening, Lorenzo returned early from his club. He found Hope in the library, Faith's words still stinging in her ears. "Your sister was here," he said. Hope nodded. "She envies me." He studied her. "And you?" She met his gaze. "I envy her freedom." Something shifted in his expression, though his voice remained calm. "Freedom comes at a cost." "And marriage?" she asked. "What does that cost?" His answer was quiet, almost reluctant. "Everything." She searched his face, but he turned away, pouring himself a drink. Across town, Baron Frederick dined with a wealthy merchant who had ambitions of entering the peerage. The merchant had a son, eager for a titled wife. "I have a daughter," Frederick said smoothly. "Beautiful, well-bred, and soon to be available." The merchant's eyes gleamed. "And her dowry?" Frederick smiled. "We shall speak of terms." When the meeting ended, he leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He had played one daughter into a duchess. He would play the other into fortune. He did not see Faith's shadow in the hall, her face pale as she heard every word. That night, Faith sat in her room with the candle burning low, the paper still spread open to Hope's wedding sketch. She touched her sister's face with her fingertips, then tore the page down the middle. Hope dreamed again of the chapel. But this time, when Lorenzo turned from her, she did not cry out. She stood alone in her gown, proud, unbent, and when she woke, her resolve was clearer than ever. She would not be pitied. She would not be pitied by her husband, her sister, or the world. And if the Duke thought her invisible, he would learn how wrong he was. The first frost came early that year. London's streets grew slick with ice, the lamps burning pale against the fog. Hope sat by the window in the blue drawing-room, a shawl over her shoulders, Faith's last letter folded tight in her hand. Lorenzo had been away since dawn, attending meetings in Westminster. She had not seen him all day, though his presence filled the house like the echo of footsteps. The fire cracked. She unfolded the letter again. Father insists I meet with Mr. Blackstone's son once more. He says he will make the match regardless of my refusal. I dread it, Hope. If you have any power with your Duke, I beg you to speak for me. Hope pressed her forehead to the cool glass. Any power with your Duke? The words cut deeper than her sister intended. What power did she truly have with him? She was his wife, yes, but in name only. The sound of hoofbeats startled her. She rose just as the front doors swung open. Voices rose in the hall, hurried, alarmed. She stepped out in time to see Lorenzo carried between two footmen, his coat torn, blood streaking his temple. "Your Grace!" she cried. He stirred, his face pale. A carriage overturned, he muttered. No cause for alarm. But there was cause. His eyes fluttered, his steps faltered. The footman half dragged him into the study and laid him on the sofa. Hope knelt at his side, fingers trembling as she touched his forehead. The wound was shallow, but his skin was burning. Fever had already taken hold. "Fetch the physician at once," she ordered. The butler bowed and hurried out. She turned back to Lorenzo. "Stay awake." His eyes flickered open, heavy-lidded. "You command me as if I were a servant. Then obey as one," she said fiercely. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, even through the pain. The physician arrived within the hour, stitched the cut, and left instructions. Rest, cool cloths, tinctures for the fever. Hope listened, memorized, and dismissed him. Through the night, she sat by the sofa, changing the cloth on his brow, coaxing water past his lips. His fever rose and broke in waves. Sometimes he muttered incoherently. Sometimes he called out names, his father, Eleanor, once even Faith. But once, as dawn brushed the curtains, she heard him whisper, "Hope." Her breath caught. She leaned closer. "I am here." His hand shifted weakly, finding hers. His grip was warm, unsteady, but it held. For a long while she stayed like that, his hand in hers, their silence more intimate than words. When the fever eased and he slept more deeply, she let her head rest against the back of the sofa. Exhaustion pulled her into dreams she could not recall. The next day he was stronger, though pale. She brought broth to his chamber. He tried to sit up when she entered. "You should not exert yourself," she said, setting the tray down. "I dislike being waited on," he muttered. "You will dislike being dead more." She placed the bowl in his hands. "Eat." He gave her a look. Half irritation, half something softer, but obeyed. When he finished, he set the spoon aside. "You did not leave my side." "No," she said simply. "Why?" "Because you are my husband." Her voice was calm, steady. His gaze searched her face, as if looking for deceit and finding none. He did not thank her. He only said, quietly, "You are stronger than I thought." In the days that followed, she visited him often, bringing letters, reading aloud when his head ached. Once, when she laughed at a passage in a novel, he turned his head sharply, startled by the sound, as though he had never heard it from her before. Another time, she reached to pour his wine, and her fingers brushed his. His hand stilled, his eyes catching hers. For a moment neither moved. Then he withdrew, brusque again, but slower than he might have. On the fourth evening he rose from the bed at last, leaning heavily on his cane. She entered just as he nearly stumbled. Without thinking, she crossed the room and caught his arm. Their faces were close. Too close. His breath stirred her hair. His hand tightened on her wrist, steadying himself, though it looked more like he was steadying her. For a long moment, they did not move. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You may release me." She let go, but the impression of his grip lingered on her skin long after. Meanwhile, at the Hackerfick estate, Frederick seethed. Mr. Blackstone had withdrawn his offer after Faith's refusal. Another opportunity lost. Frederick paced the study, muttering about ungrateful daughters and wasted chances. Faith, in her chamber, wrote another letter by candlelight. "Hope, I hear whispers that your Duke was injured. I am glad he lives, though I cannot say I am glad for you. Father grows more desperate by the day. I fear what bargain he will make next. If you have any influence at all, use it. If not for me, then to save yourself from him." She folded the letter with trembling hands. She could not decide whether she wanted Hope to succeed or fail. Back at the Langer estate, Lorenzo recovered enough to leave his chamber. One evening, he joined Hope in the library. She looked up from her book, surprised. "You are restless already," she said. "I dislike being confined." He moved toward the fire. "I have been thinking." "That sounds dangerous." He gave her a look, and to her astonishment, the corner of his mouth curved. Not a smile, not quite, but something near it. "You have stood against your father, against society, even against me," he said, "and you do not falter." She closed her book. "Would you prefer I did?" "No." His voice was quiet. "I would not." Their eyes held across the firelight. Something unspoken stirred there, fragile but undeniable. Then, as if remembering himself, he turned sharply away. "Do not mistake my words for affection. We are bound by circumstance, nothing more." "Of course," she said evenly. But when he left, she found her hand trembling against the page of her book. And when he reached his chamber, he closed the door harder than necessary, as if shutting out something that had nearly slipped through. The invitation arrived with no warning, delivered on a silver tray by a footman who looked as though he had never blinked in his life. Hope turned the vellum in her hands, reading the elegant script twice, then a third time to be certain she had not imagined the flourish at the bottom. "The Duchess of Langer is requested at Lady Weatherby's ball this Thursday," she read aloud. The butler said, "Lady Weatherby is diligent in observing society's changes, Your Grace." "By changes, you mean scandals," Hope said. He did not contradict her. She folded the card. "Please send our acceptance." When Lorenzo heard, he regarded her without expression. "We are under no obligation to attend." "We are under every obligation," she answered, "unless you prefer the city to believe you too ashamed to be seen with your wife." He studied her a moment, then said, "You have a talent for cornering a man with his own sense of honor." "I only learned from the best," she said. Thursday arrived with a wind that snatched hats and rattled carriage doors. The staircase at Lady Weatherby's blazed with candles. Violins filled the air with a waltz that had already been fashionable long enough to be considered respectable. When Hope entered on Lorenzo's arm, heads turned as if a gust had swept the room. She felt the pressure of the glances, calculation from the men, curiosity from the women, a resin of pity clinging to the edges. She did not flinch. The Duchess of Langer was not a creature who flinched. Lady Weatherby greeted them with a smile that showed nearly all her teeth. "Your Graces. London has been starving for a glimpse of you both. I hope London is not disappointed?" Hope said, "London is never disappointed when there is something to discuss," Lady Weatherby replied, with a sparkle so frank that Hope almost liked her. They had not been in the room 5 minutes before the first test presented itself. Mrs. Abernethy approached, lips prim with the righteousness of a woman who mistakes cruelty for moral clarity. "Duchess," she said, "how brave of you to appear." "Bravery," Hope said lightly, "is simply doing one's duty in a dress." Mrs. Abernethy's mouth thinned. "There were expectations, you know. The younger sister was, how shall I say it, anticipated." "The younger sister remains beloved," Hope said. "As do all younger sisters until they are older." A laugh escaped someone behind Mrs. Abernethy. Lorenzo's sleeve shifted under Hope's hand. She felt, rather than saw him look at her. The corner of his mouth almost softened. Almost. They moved on. The room surged and folded around them. Hope's name traveled ahead, sometimes in admiration, sometimes with a small, eager sharpening, as if the syllables could cut. She endured. The third dance was a quadrille. The Duchess of Langford sailed by and murmured, "A steady head wins any storm." Hope inclined her own, surprised to find an ally where she had expected none. During the fourth dance, the wind outside rose, striking the long windows. Hope stood near the terrace doors for air. She felt a presence at her side and turned to find Lord Maitland, the sort of man who had never been denied anything except, she suspected, a warning from his own reflection. "Your Grace," he said, bowing, "I applaud your courage. It cannot be easy to stand where another was chosen to stand." "My husband chose a bride," Hope replied. "He has one." Lord Maitland's smile slanted. "Yes, though one hears the ceremony itself was a trifle uncertain. Pauses, hesitations. The city adores a story. So do I." Hope's spine cooled. "Stories are for those with nothing of their own." He leaned a fraction closer. "If a lady ever wished to write a new one, perhaps with the assistance of a friend, heaven and earth would help her." "Then heaven and earth may occupy themselves elsewhere," Lorenzo said. Hope had not heard him approach. He stood at her other side, expression composed, voice very calm. Lord Maitland straightened, bluff suddenly inadequate. The Duke said, "My wife does not require assistance." "Not from heaven, and certainly not from you," Maitland coloured. "Your Grace misinterprets." "I seldom do," Lorenzo said. Maitland bowed and retreated, the set of his shoulders promising that he would tell the story anyway, but from a very safe distance. Hope let out the breath she had been holding. "Thank you," she said. "I did not do it for thanks," Lorenzo replied. "I know," she said. "You did it because you could not bear his presumption." He glanced at her. "And yours." "My presumption," she said, "is to stand where I was set, and not be moved." They danced the fifth set. He was an exact partner. His hand at her waist knew the measure of space. His gaze never dipped where rumor could mistake it for tenderness. But when the final notes faded, she realized she had not thought of the chapel once. The memory had been pressed into silence by the greater noise of simply remaining upright. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Baron Frederick poured a second glass of port for Mr. Jonas Blackstone, who had risen from tradesman to merchant to something like a gentleman by sheer appetite and a talent for finding money in the pockets of those who thought themselves too clever to lose it. "My daughter," Frederick said smoothly, "requires a husband of means and ambition. I admire both in you and more in your son." Mr. Blackstone considered. "A title elevates, Baron, but titles are dear. What is the dowry?" Frederick named a figure generous enough to make a father's love seem expensive. Mr. Blackstone did not blink. "And the girl?" "Beautiful," Frederick said, "and docile." He neglected to add that Faith had not spoken to him for 2 days. Mr. Blackstone set down his glass. "I will present my son on Saturday. If she pleases him, we speak again." "Splendid," Frederick said. "And for discretion?" Mr. Blackstone smiled. "I never trade in words when coin does better." Faith learned of the plan from a maid with an honest face and poor talent for keeping news. She went to her mother's sitting room and found Truce Hackerfick, her name soft as her voice, mending a lace cuff that had not been whole since Faith's christening. "Mother," Faith said, "father means to sell me to a merchant's son." Truce's needle paused. "Your father means to secure your future." "My future," Faith said, "is not a coin purse." Truce lifted her eyes. The years had gentled them. There was a sorrow there Faith had not noticed as a child. "My darling, women are given futures like rooms they did not choose. We make them livable. We put flowers in the windows. Sometimes we even forget the door is locked." "I will not forget," Faith said. "And I will not marry a man because he can pay for me." Truce touched her hand. "Then you must be brave." "How?" Faith asked, and the question was a quiet cry. "Begin," Truce said, "by not tearing your sister to shreds when she did not set the trap." Faith turned her face away. "It should have been my wedding." "It was a wedding," Truce said gently. "Not a coronation." Back at Lady Weatherby's, the night reached the hour when the older guests decided their virtue was preserved, and the younger guests decided their reputations were probably not. A small commotion near the card room drew attention. Whispers gathered, then solidified into a rumor with alarming speed. Hope felt the shift in the air before she heard the words. Mrs. Abernethy drifted near, color high. "I am so sorry, Duchess. One hates to be the bearer of unpleasantness. A gentleman has shared a tale, that at your ceremony the Duke hesitated, that he meant to refuse." Hope said, "One hates to be the hearer of unpleasantness." If a gentleman shared such a tale, he forgot the meaning of the word. Mrs. Abernethy blinked. "But is it true?" "Truth," Hope said, "belongs to those who stood there." Mrs. Abernethy looked momentarily uncertain, as if she had misplaced her certainty behind a potted palm. Then she rallied. "In any case, one hopes the marriage will be fruitful." "As do I," Hope said, and then she stepped past, moving as if the floor itself carried her. Lorenzo found her at the edge of the terrace, where the wind worried the draperies. "It has spread," he said. "It was always going to spread," she answered. "I could call Maitland out," he said, almost to himself. "I could make him print a retraction." "You could," Hope said. "Or you could do something more frightening." He looked at her. "What is that?" "Stand with me again," she said, "in rooms like this until they tire of an old story and must find a new one." He was quiet. After a moment he offered his arm. They re-entered together. The next set began. He danced the opening with her in a manner that permitted no one to mistake his choice. When he handed her to Lord Ashburn for the next figure, it was with a courtesy so deliberate that even Mrs. Abernethy had to admire it. By the time they returned to their carriage, the knight had decided on a verdict. The Duchess had withstood inspection, and the Duke had not flinched under scrutiny. London, always hungry, would need a fresher dish soon. In the carriage, the city's lamps flickered past like thoughts one refuses to confess. Hope said, "Thank you." "You do not owe me gratitude," Lorenzo replied. "I do not," she said, "but I offer it." He rested his head back, studying the ceiling as if it might offer an easier life. It was easier to be a man before stepping into that chapel. It was easier to be a woman before stepping into it as well, she said. The silence that followed did not bite. It simply existed, like a chair in a room no one had expected to need, but suddenly found useful. Saturday came dressed in sunlight that did London little good. Mr. Blackstone arrived at the Hackerfick estate with his son, Edwin, a young man whose hair looked as if it had been combed in fear of disobeying him. Frederick greeted them with the warmth of a man welcoming his accountants. Faith entered with measured steps. Edwin bowed. "Miss Hackerfick, I am honored." "Mr. Blackstone," she said, "do you prefer your virtues weighed by the pound or by the yard?" Edwin blinked. "I beg your pardon? Father tells me you deal in measures," Faith said. "I wished to be introduced properly." Frederick's smile hardened. Faith will pour the tea. She poured with a steadiness that felt like defiance. Mr. Blackstone praised the estate's prospects. Frederick praised Edwin's prudence. Edwin praised himself by accident 3 times and once on purpose. Faith said very little. When the cups were empty, Mr. Blackstone rose. "My son is pleased," he said. "We shall speak of settlements." Faith spoke before Frederick could. "I am not." Silence fell with the efficiency of a curtain. Frederick said, "Faith," she looked at Mr. Blackstone, "I thank you for your interest. I do not accept." Edwin flushed. "Have we given offense?" "You have not," she said. "Only evidence." Mr. Blackstone's smile thinned. "Baron, it seems your daughter requires guidance." Frederick laughed, a sound that did not belong to happiness. "Gentlemen, forgive a girl's nerves. She is young." "I am not nervous," Faith said. "I am decided." Mr. Blackstone put on his hat. "Decisions have prices. He bowed with a stiffness that carried menace. "Good day." When they had gone, Frederick turned on his daughter. "You will ruin us." "Then ruin me first," Faith said. "I am done being sold." He took a step toward her. Truce rose from her chair without haste and stood between them. Frederick stopped. Truce did not speak. She did not need to. Some women hold a man with anger. Some hold him with the memory of who he might have been. Truce had that talent, and for one thin moment it worked. Frederick looked away. "You will apologize," he said, "and you will accept the next offer." "I will not," Faith said. He smiled. "Then I will see to it that you must." That evening, a sealed note reached the Duke's study. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the ink quick, the message shorter than an accusation, and twice as poisonous. "Your Grace, there are men who recall the hesitation at your wedding. There are papers eager to print it. There are fathers who could be persuaded to be discreet. For a price. Shall we speak?" The signature was nothing at all, only a flourish that might have been a name in a mirror. Lorenzo read it once, then again, his jaw setting. He rang for the butler. "Send for my solicitor," he said, "and send a footman to Lady Weatherby's. Quietly. Ask which of her guests last night has been entertaining new friends among the cheaper printers." When he was alone, he stood at the window and watched the city draw its grey breath. He had danced with his wife. He had faced a room that wanted him to flinch and had not. Now the old game returned. Money for silence, silence for peace. He did not hear Hope until she was near. "Someone means to sell your paws?" she said. He turned. "Yes, let them," she said. His brows drew together. "You would have me do nothing?" "I would have you spend nothing," she said. "You paid enough at the altar." "And if the papers shout?" "Then they shout," she said. "We will appear at another ball. We will ride in the park. We will be seen at church. We will speak to the people who matter and ignore the ones who do not. And when the city discovers that scandal earns no coin here, it will shop elsewhere." He looked at her as if she had surprised him by turning into a useful ally. "You believe we can simply outlast it." "I know we can," she said. "Unless you prefer to pay for every whisper until the end of your days." He almost smiled. "You corner me again." "I'm only tidy," she said. "I dislike clutter, especially of the moral kind." He returned to the window. "Very well. We will not pay." "Good," she said. "Then dance with me again tomorrow." "That is currency enough." He nodded once. In her own bed that night, Hope lay awake and listened to the rain begin. Somewhere across the city, Faith pressed her hand to a cold window pane and decided that if she could not have freedom by permission, she would take it by invention. And in his dark study, Baron Frederick weighed a new calculation. If the Duke would not be bled by rumour, perhaps he could be provoked by danger. The candle burned lower. The city breathed. And none of them yet knew which price would be demanded first. The morning after Lady Weatherby's ball, the house felt unusually quiet. Hope took breakfast alone, as usual, though the servants' eyes flicked toward her with something different now. Not pity, but a shade of respect. Word must have travelled quickly. The Duchess had endured inspection, and the Duke had not flinched at her side. She stirred her tea without tasting it. Respect was a thin meal. What she wanted, though she hardly admitted it to herself, was a marriage that did not feel like two strangers pacing separate cages. The door opened. Lorenzo entered. He rarely appeared at breakfast. He looked almost the same as he always did. Dark coat, precise cravat. But there was a weight in his posture that had not been there the night before. "Good morning," Hope said. He inclined his head, eyes steady on her face. "You were formidable last night." Her spoon stilled. "I survived. That is all. Survival is not to be underestimated," he said. For a moment, the air between them softened. Then he poured his coffee, and the clatter of the spoon broke the spell. Later that day, Hope walked the gallery, pausing before a portrait of Lorenzo's father. The stern face looked down at her, as if measuring her worth. She felt it in her bones, the endless judgment, from paintings, from society, from the man whose ring she wore. She did not hear him approach, but she felt it when he stopped beside her. "My father," he said. He believed every choice was a transaction, a calculation of power and gain. She glanced at him. "Do you share his belief?" "I have lived by it," he said simply. His eyes shifted to her. "Though last night, I wondered." "Wondered what?" she asked. He did not answer, and she did not press. But as he turned to leave, his gaze lingered a fraction too long. She felt it trace her like a touch, though no hand had moved. That evening, a carriage arrived with unexpected guests. Lord and Lady Ashburn, accompanied by their daughter, a woman of 20 whose laughter could be heard before she crossed the threshold. They came with polite excuses, passing through the neighborhood. But Hope knew the truth. They wanted to see the Duchess who had supplanted her sister. Dinner was a trial of subtle barbs. Lady Ashburn's compliments to Hope were sharpened with hidden pity. "You bear the weight of the household so well, Your Grace. So much more composed than your sister might have been." Hope smiled. "Faith is still young. She will have her chance to astonish society." Lord Ashburn steered the conversation toward Lorenzo. "And you, Duke, have managed to appear quite unmoved by whispers. A rare strength, though I wonder if even you will find it tiresome." Lorenzo's hand tightened on his glass. Hope saw it and spoke before he could. "Whispers are like smoke. They vanish when there is no fire to feed them." Lady Ashburn laughed. "How very brave, Duchess. Though I dare say the smoke lingers." Hope held her gaze, calm, unflinching. "Then we shall let it choke those who breathe it." Silence fell, brief but sharp. Then the conversation turned. When the Ashburns had gone, Lorenzo lingered in the drawing room, the fire casting him in gold and shadow. "You spoke as though defending me," he said. "I spoke as though defending us," she corrected. Something flickered in his eyes, something like surprise, and something else behind it. He set down his glass. "You are unexpected." Her lips curved faintly. "That seems to be the story of my life." He stepped closer, almost without realizing it. She caught the faint scent of brandy and rain in his coat. For a breath, it seemed as if he might reach for her hand. But then he stopped, straightened, and turned away. That night she lay awake, staring at the canopy above her bed. Across the hall, a separate fire burned in his room. She imagined him sitting before it, jaw set, eyes restless, hands steady on nothing. The next day they rode in the park. It was Lorenzo's idea, though he did not say it was. He simply appeared at her door with gloves in hand and said, "The horses are ready." London society lined the paths of Hyde Park, as it always did, to see and be seen. Hope rode with her back straight, her bonnet tied neatly beneath her chin. Lorenzo kept his horse at her side, his gaze sweeping the crowd. The whispers followed them, but they were whispers. No one dared speak aloud. And when Hope's mare shied at a sudden carriage rattle, it was Lorenzo's hand that steadied her reins, his touch firm over hers. Their eyes met. His grip lingered half a heartbeat too long before he released it. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "Your composure is remarkable." "Composure is armor," she answered. "Armor cracks," he said. She held his gaze. "Not if it is well forged." Something passed between them then, not words but a current. He looked away first, spurring his horse lightly. That evening, Hope found herself in the library again, this time with a letter from Faith. Her sister's words were brittle with jealousy and despair. "Father means to sell me again. I cannot bear it. Sometimes I wish it had been me in your gown, even if the Duke hated me for it. At least I would not be forgotten." Hope's hands shook as she folded the letter. She turned and found Lorenzo standing in the doorway, silent. "You read my face as easily as the page," she said. "What troubles you?" His voice was softer than usual, though he kept his distance. "My sister suffers," she said, "and I cannot reach her." "Your father is a fool," he said. Perhaps, but she is still my sister. He stepped forward, then stopped again, as if fighting himself. His hand flexed once at his side, a restless movement he seemed not to notice. You care for her more than she cares for you, he said. That is what it means to love, she answered quietly. Their eyes met. For once, his gaze did not cut. It held. A knock broke the moment. The butler announced a visitor, and Lorenzo turned sharply, the mask of distance sliding back into place. But Hope had seen it. The hesitation in his hand, the warmth flickering behind his eyes. She knew he was not ready to name it. Neither was she. But the journey had begun, and neither could turn it back. Lorenzo had been away since dawn, attending meetings in Westminster. She had not seen him all day, though his presence filled the house like the echo of footsteps. The fire cracked. She unfolded the letter again. Father insists I meet with Mr. Blackstone's son once more. He says he will make the match regardless of my refusal. I dread it, Hope. If you have any power with your Duke, I beg you to speak for me. Hope pressed her forehead to the cool glass. Any power with your Duke? The words cut deeper than her sister intended. What power did she truly have with him? She was his wife, yes, but in name only. The sound of hoofbeats startled her. She rose just as the front doors swung open. Voices rose in the hall, hurried, alarmed. She stepped out in time to see Lorenzo carried between two footmen, his coat torn, blood streaking his temple. "Your Grace!" she cried. He stirred, his face pale. A carriage overturned, he muttered. No cause for alarm, but there was cause. His eyes fluttered, his steps faltered. The footman half dragged him into the study and laid him on the sofa. Hope knelt at his side, fingers trembling as she touched his forehead. The wound was shallow, but his skin was burning. Fever had already taken hold. "Fetch the physician at once," she ordered. The butler bowed and hurried out. She turned back to Lorenzo. "Stay awake." His eyes flickered open, heavy-lidded. "You command me as if I were a servant. Then obey as one," she said fiercely. A faint smile tugged at his mouth, even through the pain. The physician arrived within the hour, stitched the cut, and left instructions. Rest, cool cloths, tinctures for the fever. Hope listened, memorized, and dismissed him. Through the night, she sat by the sofa, changing the cloth on his brow, coaxing water past his lips. His fever rose and broke in waves. Sometimes he muttered incoherently. Sometimes he called out names, his father, Eleanor, once even Faith. But once, as dawn brushed the curtains, she heard him whisper, "Hope." Her breath caught. She leaned closer. "I am here." His hand shifted weakly, finding hers. His grip was warm, unsteady, but it held. For a long while she stayed like that, his hand in hers, their silence more intimate than words. When the fever eased and he slept more deeply, she let her head rest against the back of the sofa. Exhaustion pulled her into dreams she could not recall. The next day he was stronger, though pale. She brought broth to his chamber. He tried to sit up when she entered. "You should not exert yourself," she said, setting the tray down. "I dislike being waited on," he muttered. "You will dislike being dead more." She placed the bowl in his hands. "Eat." He gave her a look. Half irritation, half something softer, but obeyed. When he finished, he set the spoon aside. "You did not leave my side." "No," she said simply. "Why?" "Because you are my husband." Her voice was calm, steady. His gaze searched her face, as if looking for deceit and finding none. He did not thank her. He only said, quietly, "You are stronger than I thought." In the days that followed, she visited him often, bringing letters, reading aloud when his head ached. Once, when she laughed at a passage in a novel, he turned his head sharply, startled by the sound, as though he had never heard it from her before. Another time, she reached to pour his wine, and her fingers brushed his. His hand stilled, his eyes catching hers. For a moment neither moved. Then he withdrew, brusque again, but slower than he might have. On the fourth evening he rose from the bed at last, leaning heavily on his cane. She entered just as he nearly stumbled. Without thinking, she crossed the room and caught his arm. Their faces were close. Too close. His breath stirred her hair. His hand tightened on her wrist, steadying himself, though it looked more like he was steadying her. For a long moment, they did not move. Then he stepped back, clearing his throat. "You may release me." She let go, but the impression of his grip lingered on her skin long after. Meanwhile, at the Hackerfick estate, Frederick seethed. Mr. Blackstone had withdrawn his offer after Faith's refusal. Another opportunity lost. Frederick paced the study, muttering about ungrateful daughters and wasted chances. Faith, in her chamber, wrote another letter by candlelight. "Hope, I hear whispers that your Duke was injured. I am glad he lives, though I cannot say I am glad for you. Father grows more desperate by the day. I fear what bargain he will make next. If you have any influence at all, use it. If not for me, then to save yourself from him." She folded the letter with trembling hands. She could not decide whether she wanted Hope to succeed or fail. Back at the Lange estate, Lorenzo recovered enough to leave his chamber. One evening, he joined Hope in the library. She looked up from her book, surprised. "You are restless already," she said. "I dislike being confined." He moved toward the fire. "I have been thinking. That sounds dangerous." He gave her a look, and to her astonishment, the corner of his mouth curved. Not a smile, not quite, but something near it. "You have stood against your father, against society, even against me," he said, "and you do not falter." She closed her book. "Would you prefer I did?" "No." His voice was quiet. "I would not." Their eyes held across the firelight. Something unspoken stirred there, fragile but undeniable. Then, as if remembering himself, he turned sharply away. "Do not mistake my words for affection. We are bound by circumstance, nothing more." "Of course," she said evenly. But when he left, she found her hand trembling against the page of her book. And when he reached his chamber, he closed the door harder than necessary, as if shutting out something that had nearly slipped through. The frost lingered through December, clinging to rooftops like a thin sheet of glass. Hope walked in the gardens, her breath clouding in the cold, the crunch of gravel under her boots the only sound. For days now, Lorenzo had avoided her. After their fragile moments in the library, he had withdrawn again, vanishing into his study or riding alone for hours. She told herself she did not care. She told herself she had no expectations. Yet when she saw his horse return without him one afternoon, her heart lurched. She hurried down the steps just as he entered the hall, cheeks flushed with wind, hair damp with fog. "You have been gone since morning," she said before she could stop herself. His eyes flicked to her. "Do I require permission for my comings and goings?" "No," she said, steadying her voice. "But I might have liked to know whether you meant to return." The words hung between them, more vulnerable than she intended. His jaw tightened. "You presume too much, Duchess. We are bound by law, not affection." The sting cut deep, though she did not show it. She inclined her head. "As you say, Your Grace." She turned, meaning to leave, but his hand caught her wrist. Not harshly, not tenderly, simply enough to stop her. "Hope," he said, her name rough in his throat. Her eyes lifted to his. For a heartbeat, something shifted there. Then he released her. "Forgive me. I forget myself." She walked away, her pulse unsteady. In her chamber that night, she stared at the fire until it died, wondering which was worse, his coldness or the flicker of warmth he always snatched back. At the Hackerfick estate, Frederick was busy with new schemes. Mr. Blackstone had withdrawn, but another prospect had appeared. Sir Alistair Rowntree, a baronet with money made in railroads and a hunger for status. "He will pay handsomely for Faith," Frederick muttered, pacing his study. "And I shall insist upon it. A second dowry, enough to settle every debt." Faith stood before him, fists clenched. "I will not marry him. He is old enough to be my grandfather." "Then you will be well provided for." Frederick snapped. "I would rather remain unmarried." You will not shame me with spinsterhood, he thundered. Do you think your sister wanted her fate? She obeyed. And so will you. Faith's voice shook, but her words did not. Hope did not obey. She endured. Frederick's hand struck the desk. Enough. You will do as I say. Truce entered then. Pale but resolute. Frederick, let the girl be. Silence, woman, he said, though his eyes flicked uneasily at her defiance. Faith left before the argument could rise further. In her chamber, she wrote again to Hope, ink blurring under her hand. He means to sell me to Rowntree. I cannot bear it. You are my only hope. I beg you, if your duke has any scrap of influence, use it for me. The letter reached the Lange estate 2 days later. Hope read it in the library, her heart pounding. She found Lorenzo that evening, standing by the fire with a glass in his hand. My father means to force Faith into marriage with Sir Alistair Rowntree, she said. You know his reputation. The man is cruel, debauched, and twice her age. Lorenzo's gaze was steady. What would you have me do? You are her brother-in-law. You have influence. You can prevent it. He set the glass down. I will not entangle myself in your father's bargains. It is not my affair. Hope's voice rose, sharper than she intended. Not your affair? She is my sister. If you will not aid her for her sake, then do it for mine. His jaw hardened. You mistake me for a man who can mend every injustice. I cannot. You will not, she said bitterly. He turned sharply. Do not accuse me of cowardice. Then prove me wrong, she shot back. For a moment, silence roared between them, louder than any quarrel. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. Do you think me heartless? I think you afraid, she said, her voice low but steady. Afraid to feel, because you would rather be stone than risk being wounded again. His breath caught, his hand lifting as if to seize hers, but he let it fall, curling into a fist instead. Enough, he said hoarsely. Leave me. She turned on her heel, her gown sweeping the floor, and did not look back. That night, she wept quietly into her pillow, furious with herself for caring, furious with him for refusing. Across the hall, Lorenzo paced his chamber until dawn, every word she had spoken echoing in his head. At breakfast, the air between them was brittle, their words clipped. Yet when she rose to leave, he said her name again. Softly this time, almost reluctant. Hope. She paused. I will consider what can be done. She met his gaze, her eyes searching his face. Consider quickly. Faith has little time. He inclined his head. Quickly then. And though his words were measured, his hand tightened imperceptibly on the edge of the table, as if holding back a storm he did not yet know how to release. The rain began with a whisper, and then settled into a steady, patient music, the kind that turned thought inward and made even a large house feel small. Hope let the sound carry her toward sleep. The embers on the hearth glowed softly. Her maid had gone. The curtains stirred when the wind remembered them. She closed her eyes and felt, for once, not watched, not weighed, not itemized against a ledger of expectations. A knock came, quiet, uncertain. She sat up, heart quickening. Yes? The door opened a hand's width. Lorenzo stood there, coat unbuttoned, hair damp from the night air. He looked less like a duke than a man who had left an argument with himself unfinished. May I speak with you? He asked. She hesitated only long enough to decide not to be afraid. Come in. He entered and closed the door behind him, but did not come nearer than the edge of the carpet. His eyes moved to the window, to the rain, and then back to her. He seemed to search the room for a place to put his pride, and not find one. I have carried something so long, he said at last, that I have mistaken the weight for my own shape. She drew the shawl closer and waited. When I was a boy, he went on, voice low, I found a sparrow beneath the eaves after a storm. One wing bent, the other beating itself sore, trying to lift the body that would not follow. I wrapped it in my handkerchief, sat with it an entire afternoon. I told it, and here his mouth almost curved at the foolishness. that it would fly again if it simply agreed with me. It died at dusk anyway. He moved a few steps into the room, not looking at her now, looking instead at the fire as if it might speak back. I decided I would not keep small, breakable things. Better to be a boy who did not touch than a boy who learned again and again that touch is another name for loss. She said very softly, "And you kept your decision." I did. And it grew clever. It learned to speak in other tongues, duty, reserve, the inconveniences of feeling. He let out a breath that had trouble being a laugh. "I have been a lion in a cage of my own building. People come to see lions. They admire the bars as much as the creature. It simplifies them both." "And the lion believes the bars are his mane," Hope said. At that he glanced at her, startled, as if she had lifted a key he had not known she was holding. The rain tapped the panes like a discreet friend insisting on being remembered. He came nearer, but not yet to her chair. When I stood at the altar, I recognized the old decision instantly. Walk away. Do not touch what might break. Do not become again that boy with his handkerchief, and an afternoon that lasted too long. His voice roughened. I nearly did. "I know," she said. "I have not asked your forgiveness for that pause." His gaze held hers. "Because the pause told me the truth. I was still that boy. Still a lion who believes a cage is nature. And then—" He stopped, and for a moment the floorboards seemed louder than speech. "Then you refused to vanish. You walked into rooms armed with composure. You let society look and find itself ridiculous. You sat through my fever as if it were a storm, and you a harbor I had not deserved. I have observed many brave acts. I have been fool enough to call them something else. Yours I cannot name wrongly." She felt the words like heat, and kept her voice steady because he had lent her steadiness by speaking at all. "You will make me vain if you continue. You are the least vain woman I have known." He took the last few steps and stood before her, uncertainty and resolve sharing the same breath. "If I speak wrong, say so. I am a poor translator of my own heart." "Try," she said. He looked at his hands as if surprised to find them empty. Then he said, "I do not want your sister. I do not want what was promised and stolen and discussed in drawing rooms as if it were a bolt of silk. I want the woman who held a thorny city at bay with a glance. I want the one who said my name at a whisper when I was lost in fever, as if it were a place to return to." His voice dropped, almost a question. "Hope." Everything in her went very still, then very living. She had not realized how carefully she had kept herself arranged, like a vase balanced at the edge of a shelf. Now she set the vase down. "Come sit," she said. He knelt instead, one knee to the carpet, as if he had remembered chivalry only by discovering humility. The firelight made a quiet country on his face. Warmth in the hollows, gold at the edges. He did not reach for her. He placed his hand on the arm of the chair and looked up, and she saw a man who had decided not to be alone in his own life. "I thought I must kiss you to be understood," he said, wryness softening the confession. "But perhaps that is my old language insisting on a ceremony." "Perhaps," she answered, and lifted her hand. His breath caught, only once, but she felt it, when her fingers touched his hair, still damp and unruly from the rain. She laid her palm against his temple, where she had pressed a cool cloth in the dark days, and something in him unclenched. He closed his eyes. "My father taught me transactions," he said. "Eleanor taught me grief. You—" his throat worked. "You teach me rest, then rest," she said. He rose slowly, not letting go of her hand, and sat on the edge of the chaise. She shifted to make space, the shawl slipping. He caught it and settled it back around her shoulders with a care that felt like a vow. Neither of them spoke for a time. The rain kept the count for them. He said at last, "There is another part of the story. The sparrow. I told myself I would never hold such a thing again. But the truth is, I kept looking. At hedges, at eaves. The eye does not retire because the mouth has made a speech." "You wanted to save them still," she murmured. "I wanted to be spared from wanting," he said. "I failed." "Fail again," she said, and there was a smile in it, but not unkind. He exhaled, and the sound was what a door makes when it is opened from within. Very gently he drew her nearer until her head found the hollow beneath his shoulder, as if it had been measured for it when the house was built. His arm came around her, not to claim, only to keep. "Is this allowed?" he asked, the question so un-Duke-like it made her chest ache. "It is required," she said. She felt him breathe, deeper now, less like a man on a cliff. His hand, uncertain at first, found its quiet, fingertips at her forearm, palm warm through the shawl. He did not stroke, he did not press, he was simply there, the sure weight of him a new grammar her body understood at once. They listened. To the weather, yes, and also to the other noise, the slow rearrangement of two lives deciding to share a wall. Somewhere a coal settled in the grate with a sound like a scent. "Tell me about the lion," she said, drowsiness threading her voice. "What does he do when he remembers the savannah?" "He walks the cage," Lorenzo said, a smile she could hear. "Once, twice, and then he lies down with his head toward the door. And what opens it? Not applause," he said, "not fear. A keeper who understands that iron is a habit. Or," he paused, "or a woman who does not rattle the bars, but sits beside them until the lion remembers he is more than his enclosure." She let the image rest between them. "Then perhaps the door is open already." He was quiet for a long moment. "If it is, I will not close it again." "Good," she whispered. "I dislike the sound." He laughed, low and brief, like a man surprised by pleasure and unwilling to frighten it. The rain thickened and then thinned, as if debating the proper accompaniment. Sleep tugged at her. She resisted out of habit. Sleep belonged to those who were safe, and safety had been a rumor for so long. But his heartbeat beneath her ear argued persuasively. "You may sleep," he said, the words half command and half gift. "I will keep watch. You have watched too long alone," she murmured. "Let the lion rest." "I shall," he said, and his hand, only then, only once, moved in the smallest of arcs along her forearm, as if to mark the place where vigilance ended and trust began. Her breathing slowed. He felt it change and felt, with a wonder that embarrassed him, his own eyes sting. He had not meant to come to her room to weep. He did not, quite. But grief and something not grief rose together and were not enemies. He bent his head, not to kiss, not yet, and pressed his forehead to her hair. "Hope," he said, barely sound. She did not answer. She slept, and for the first time since the chapel, he understood that silence could bless. The house held itself still around them. In the corridor, a clock asserted the hour, and then apologized for interrupting. Wind nosed at the windows and went away when it found no purchase. He thought, briefly, of Frederick, sharp-toothed plans gnawing at his daughter's futures, and felt the old lion stir. Protectiveness did not roar in him. It settled its weight instead, making decisions heavy enough to be true. Tomorrow he would send a letter that would end Rowntree. Tomorrow he would go to the Baron and discover whether a man without shame could still be made to feel loss of power. Tomorrow would be iron and daylight. Tonight he chose gentler strength. He shifted only enough to spare his shoulder and drew the shawl more securely around them both. He did not sleep at once. He listened to the rain argue its case and then relent. He learned the rhythm of her breathing, and, to his surprise, found that his own matched it without instruction. When he finally slept, it was the sleep of a man who had put down something he was never meant to carry alone. And when the grey of morning smudged the edges of the curtains, the lion did not startle at the door. He was where he wished to be, not pacing, not performing, but keeping a quiet watch while the sparrow dreamed on his arm and forgot, for a few hours, the sky's old sting. She would wake and blush, perhaps, and he would be clumsy with gentleness. There would be breakfast to face, letters to write, battles to hazard. But as the first small light passed over the floorboards and climbed the coverlet to where her hand rested in his, he understood with a clarity that did not require rhetoric. The cage had a hinge after all, and it worked from within. He lay there and let the knowledge settle. When she stirred, he tightened his arm, the simplest of vows, and the rain, reduced now to a careful tapping, signed its name to the night they had made between them. The grey of morning crept gently through the curtains. Hope stirred before she remembered where she was, her cheek pillowed against Lorenzo's shoulder, his arm heavy and protective across her. For one bewildering instant she thought herself still dreaming. But the warmth, the steady rhythm of his breath, the scent of rain lingering on his coat, it was all real. Her first instinct was to slip away, afraid of waking him, afraid of what he might think of her boldness if he found her still in his arms. But when she shifted, his hold tightened slightly. His voice, rough with sleep, rumbled above her ear. "Stay." The word was quiet, almost pleading. She froze, then let herself sink back against him. Her eyes closed again, not with weariness, but with a strange, unaccustomed peace. Later, when the maid brought breakfast, the Duke did not bother to move to his own chamber. He remained in the Duchess's, unhurried, his presence filling the room as naturally as the fire. The servants tried not to stare, but their glances betrayed them. It was unheard of. The Duke, once so distant, lingering at his wife's side, as though there were nowhere else he meant to be. Hope felt both flustered and warmed by it, her cheeks colouring at the smallest gestures, the way he poured her tea without being asked, the way his eyes rested on her as though he were learning her face anew. He said little, but every look, every touch of courtesy, was louder than words. That afternoon, Hope retreated to the conservatory, a place she had claimed as her own in those early lonely weeks. Among the glass and the greenery, she had tended small things. A row of herbs, a few potted flowers. One plant in particular she cherished, a fragile little bloom she had coaxed from nearly nothing. But now, as she entered, her heart sank. The leaves were ragged, the stem bowed. A fat green caterpillar clung greedily to what had been her finest blossom. She tried to dislodge it, to smooth the ruin, but the damage was plain. The plant she had cared for every day was spoiled in a single night. She bit her lip, furious at herself for the sting in her eyes. To weep over a plant was absurd, childish. Yet still she fussed, rearranging the soil, touching the withered leaves as though her fingers could mend them. Hope! The sound of her name startled her. She turned to see Lorenzo in the doorway, his gaze fixed not on the plant, but on her face. He crossed the room in 3 long strides. "It is nothing," she said quickly, trying to laugh. "Only a plant. I am foolish to care so much." He did not answer at once. Instead, he watched her, his brow furrowing as if her sorrow was a thing he felt in his own chest. Then, gently but firmly, he reached and took her hands away from the leaves. "Do not call it foolish," he said, his voice low, steady. "If it matters to you, it matters." Her breath caught. She tried to turn her face, but he tilted her chin toward him, unashamed of the servants nearby. "It is a plant," he said again, softer now. "We will get another. But I cannot bear to see you grieve over this." She blinked up at him, stunned, not by the words but by the look in his eyes. They were no longer guarded, no longer cold. They burned with something unmistakable, something that made her pulse quicken. Before she could speak, he drew her into his arms. Not hurriedly, not half-heartedly, he pulled her close, against his chest, in full view of the footman arranging pots nearby. Hope stiffened for a moment, shocked at such a display. But then she felt his hand settle at her back, steady and protective, and her own resistance melted. She let herself rest against him, her cheek against his coat. The world fell away. The ruined plant, the servant's startled glances, even her own doubts. All that remained was the man who held her, not as duty but as choice. "It is a plant," he murmured again, his lips brushing her hair. "And you are my wife. That is all that matters?" The words seemed to echo in the quiet glass house, louder than the rain that had begun to fall again outside. Later, when they walked back into the house together, hand in hand, the staff lowered their eyes quickly, but not before exchanging astonished looks. The tale would spread by evening. The Duke was no longer aloof. The Duke adored his Duchess. That evening Hope sat by the fire with a book she did not read, her mind still replaying the warmth of his arms around her. Lorenzo entered, carrying a letter. "From your father," he said, his tone clipped. She took it with dread. Frederick's hand was bold across the seal. She broke it open and read swiftly. "Faith is to be married. The contract with Rowntree is nearly settled. Make what peace you will with it." Her throat tightened. She looked up, eyes shining with anger and helplessness. He means to ruin her. Lorenzo's jaw set. He took the letter from her and fed it into the flames without reading further. "Do not distress yourself," he said firmly. "But Faith, I will not allow it." The certainty in his tone silenced her. She stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "You mean that?" she whispered. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I mean it," he said. His hand covered hers, warm and solid. "Your sister will not be given to that man. Not while I have breath." For a moment she could not speak. The Duke, who had once nearly abandoned her, now spoke as if her family's pain were his own. She felt tears sting her eyes. Not of sorrow this time, but of something she had almost forgotten how to feel. Trust. He saw it and squeezed her hand. "You have carried too much alone," he said softly. "Let me carry it now." The fire crackled. The rain drummed, and for the first time since her wedding day, Hope allowed herself to believe she was not alone. The rain passed, leaving London polished and sharp under a pale sun. Hope walked into the dining room the next morning expecting, as always, to find her husband already gone to his affairs. Instead, Lorenzo rose as she entered, pulling back her chair himself. The servants faltered in their movements, astonished, but he seemed not to notice. "You slept well?" he asked, voice low enough that only she could hear. She nodded, unable to stop the small smile that tugged at her lips. When she reached for the teapot, his hand brushed hers deliberately. "Allow me," he said, pouring it himself. The butler, standing a little too stiffly behind them, looked as though he had forgotten his role entirely. It was not lost on Hope. These gestures, simple as they were, carried more weight than elaborate declarations. The Duke, who once kept distance, now sought excuses for nearness. His eyes followed her with a quiet tenderness that made her breath unsteady. That afternoon, a note arrived. Lady Weatherby's winter soirée, the first gathering since their marriage where all society would be watching, not just for scandal, but for evidence. Was the union a cold bargain or something more? Hope felt her nerves twist at the thought. Lorenzo read the invitation and looked at her steadily. "We will go," he said. Together. The evening came quickly. Hope stood before the mirror, her maid fastening pearls at her throat. She thought of the ball weeks ago, when she had walked into that glittering crowd with dread, her husband cold beside her. Tonight was different. She could feel it in her pulse. When she entered the carriage, Lorenzo offered his hand, not perfunctory but with a squeeze that lingered. She glanced at him, startled, and found his gaze already on her. He did not look away. The Weatherby townhouse blazed with light. Music drifted out into the frosted air. As they entered, all conversation seemed to pause. Eyes followed them, the Duke and Duchess of Lange, subject of gossip and speculation. Hope's instinct was to lower her gaze, but Lorenzo's hand settled firmly over hers where it rested on his arm. "Do not fear them," he murmured. "They should fear us." The words were so unlike the aloof man she had married that she could only stare at him. His lips curved slightly, as though amused by her astonishment. They stepped into the ballroom. A hush rippled, then the orchestra resumed. Conversations buzzed, discreet but hungry. Lady Ashburn, with her too bright smile, approached swiftly. "Your Grace," she said to Lorenzo, "how gallant you are to appear at your wife's side so soon after your injury. One hears you were most ably nursed." Lorenzo's eyes hardened. "I was, and I have discovered," he said, his gaze flicking deliberately to Hope, "that my wife's strength exceeds any remedy a physician could offer." Hope flushed, but the effect on Lady Ashburn was immediate. A falter in her smile, a stiffness in her posture. The words would spread by midnight. The Duke not only acknowledged his wife, he praised her, publicly and without hesitation. When the dancing began, Lorenzo did not stand aloof as he once had. He claimed Hope's hand for the very first set. Gasps rippled through the crowd. As they took their places, she whispered, "Are you certain? You dislike these displays?" He bent close enough that only she could hear. "I dislike being away from you more." The music began. He led with assurance, his hand steady at her waist, his gaze never straying from her face. Hope felt the room dissolve into color and sound, but what she saw was him. Lorenzo, not the Duke, looking at her as though she were the only person in the hall. Around them, whispers turned from scorn to envy. The Duke dotes on her. He is utterly taken. Even those who once mocked now watched with something near awe. As the set ended, he kept her hand in his, guiding her from the floor as if unwilling to part with her even for a moment. Hope, breathless, caught the sight of Faith across the room. Her younger sister had come with Frederick. Faith's eyes were wide, her expression unreadable. Frederick himself was less subtle. He cornered Lorenzo near the refreshment table, his voice low but sharp. "I hear, Duke, you object to Rowntree's proposal for Faith. It would be a prosperous match." Lorenzo's gaze was cold steel, but his voice carried enough to be overheard. "I object because he is unfit, and because I will not see another Hackerfick daughter sold like currency." Gasps flickered at the edges of the room. Frederick's face mottled red, but Lorenzo had already turned back to Hope, taking her arm with deliberate tenderness. "Come, my dear," he said. "The air here is stale." The words, simple though they were, sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. "My dear, in public." Outside on the terrace, the night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of frost. Hope looked at him, her heart pounding. "You will have made enemies tonight." "I have enough enemies," he said, his eyes softening as they held hers. "But I have only one wife. That I will not endanger." Her breath caught. She searched his face, trying to steady herself against the rush of feeling his words awoke. He reached, brushing a loose curl from her cheek, with a touch so careful it made her ache. For a moment she thought he would kiss her there, beneath the winter sky. But instead he only said quietly, "Do you trust me yet?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "I am beginning to." It was enough. He drew her arm through his once more and led her back inside, the stairs of London society trailing after them, not of mockery, not even of curiosity, but of admiration. By the night's end, the tale was already half formed. The cold marriage was no longer cold. The Duke adored his Duchess, and the world had seen it with its own eyes.
The days following Lady Weatherby's soirée were like nothing Hope had known. Where once servants avoided her eyes, now they smiled shyly, their respect plain. When she walked in society, heads still turned, but with envy, not scorn. The whispers had changed. The Duke is besotted, the Duchess triumphant. Hope did not bask in it. She felt only the steady warmth of Lorenzo's presence. He no longer
disappeared into his study for hours. He joined her for breakfast, for walks, for evenings by the fire. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes silence was enough. But always there was his gaze, soft and unguarded, as if he still marveled at the rightness of sitting beside her. Faith's letters, however, grew darker. "Father grows desperate. He presses me daily. Rowntree insists on haste. I cannot breathe here, Hope. I would rather live alone than endure such a match." Hope read the words aloud in the library. Lorenzo, standing at the hearth, listened without interruption. At the end he said only, "Then she will not endure it." She lifted her eyes. "What will you do?" "What I should have done sooner," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath it lay iron. "Confront him." 2 days later, they travelled to the Hackerfick estate. The carriage ride was hushed, but not tense. Hope's hand rested in Lorenzo's, neither of them speaking often, but the grip between them steady, unbreakable. Frederick received them in his study, all false warmth and over-bright eyes. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, "and my dutiful daughter, how generous of you to visit." Lorenzo did not waste courtesy. He laid a folded paper on the desk. "The contract with Rowntree. I have secured its dissolution." Frederick blinked, the smile faltering. "You... what?" "Rowntree will not pursue Faith. He has been reminded that his own interests are better served elsewhere." Lorenzo's gaze was cold. "Your plan is finished." The Baron's face darkened. "You presume to meddle in my household?" "I presume," Lorenzo said, his voice like a blade, "to protect my wife's sister from being bartered like cattle. And I will presume again if you attempt it with any other man." Hope had heard his voice stern before, but never like this. Quiet, unyielding, every word a sentence past. Frederick slammed a fist on the desk. "I am her father, and I am her brother by law," Lorenzo said. "If you cannot act as a father should, then you have forfeited the right to command her." Hope's breath caught. To hear him claim Faith as kin, to see him stand so unflinchingly, it was more than she had ever dreamed to hope for. Faith herself entered then, drawn by the raised voices. She looked between them, pale but resolute. "Father, I will not marry Rowntree. I would rather be cast out than live as his possession." Frederick turned on her, face mottled. "Ungrateful girl." "No," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "No more." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Lorenzo stepped forward, placing himself subtly between the Baron and his daughters. "You heard her. This ends now." Frederick's mouth worked, but no sound came. He looked from Lorenzo's unflinching stare to Hope's steady gaze, to Faith's pale defiance. For once he found himself outmatched. He sank back in his chair, bitterness seeping into his tone. "Very well. Keep her then. She'll be a burden on you both." Hope lifted her chin. "She is no burden. She is our family." Faith's eyes filled, and she moved quickly to her sister's side, clasping her hand. The confrontation ended not with shouting, but with that simple tableau. The Baron shrunken in his chair, and the Duke, Duchess, and Faith standing united before him. On the carriage ride home, Faith sat quietly opposite them, her hands still trembling. At last she whispered, "I thought no one would save me." Hope squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself, Faith. You only needed someone to stand beside you." Lorenzo's gaze flicked between them, and then to Hope. His eyes softened in that way that still stole her breath, the look of a man who had learned at last what it meant to love. That night, back in their own house, Hope and Lorenzo walked the corridor to their chambers together. At her door she hesitated, uncertain whether to thank him, whether words could carry the weight of what he had done. He solved the question by reaching for her hand, lifting it to his lips. The kiss was not hurried, not perfunctory. It lingered. "I would face your father 1,000 times, he said quietly, "if it meant seeing you look at me as you do now." Her heart turned over. She could not speak. She only lifted her free hand to his cheek, and for once he did not retreat. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly as though the gesture itself was sanctuary. "Sleep well, my Duchess," he murmured, releasing her hand only to trail his fingers lightly down her arm, a caress disguised as courtesy. When she entered her chamber, she leaned against the door, breath unsteady, her heart full in a way she had once thought impossible. The cold Duke of her wedding day was gone. In his place was a man who had chosen her, defended her, and given her sister freedom. And for the first time, Hope dared to imagine that the future might hold not only duty and endurance, but joy. Spring crept into London slowly, as though uncertain it would be welcome. The first crocuses pushed through the frost, and with them came new whispers through drawing rooms and parlours. The Duchess of Lange. Do you see how the Duke looks at her? Do you see how she has softened him? Hope heard it in fragments, when callers lingered over tea or when maids whispered in hallways, believing themselves unheard. For once the gossip was no longer barbed, it was almost reverent. She did not live for such talk, but she could not help noticing how different it felt to be seen and not pitied, to be admired even. And always at the centre of it, Lorenzo. He had kept his word. Frederick's attempts to secure Faith's marriage had collapsed. Rowntree withdrew entirely after being reminded firmly of certain debts that might surface in Parliament. The Baron sulked in his estate, diminished, his power spent. Faith remained at the Duke's house for a time, shyly grateful. Though uncertain of her own path, Hope watched her sister walk the garden paths with a quieter step than before, as if she had been given back her own breath. One afternoon, Hope found her in the conservatory, tending new seedlings. Faith looked up, smiling faintly. "I think I will not marry soon. Perhaps not at all. I would rather choose solitude than be chosen like merchandise." Hope touched her hand. "Then you shall have solitude until you want something else. And you shall have a home here until then." Faith's eyes glistened. "You truly mean it?" Hope glanced toward the door, where Lorenzo stood quietly, observing. "We mean it," she said. Faith's smile trembled but held. That evening, as the lamps were lit and music drifted softly from the music room, Hope found herself walking beside Lorenzo in the long gallery. They passed the portraits of his ancestors, stern and unyielding. Once she had felt their eyes weigh her as though she were lacking. Tonight, she felt only their irrelevance. Lorenzo stopped before a window where rain streaked the glass, though the air was mild. He turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You have changed this house," he said. "When I married you, I thought it would be another prison. Now I find I dread leaving it because it is the only place I am free." Her breath caught. "Free," he nodded. "Free to laugh, free to speak truth, free to love." Her heart stilled at the word. He had not said it before, not outright. She waited, hardly daring to breathe. He reached for her hand, lifting it between them. His thumb brushed lightly across her knuckles, and his gaze never wavered. "Hope, I love you. I love you as I thought myself incapable of loving, without bargaining, without caution, without condition. I nearly lost you at the altar because I was a coward. I will not lose you now." Her eyes stung. She tried to answer, but her voice failed. She only stepped closer, her free hand rising to his chest. He covered it with his own, holding her there as if anchoring himself. At last she found her words. "You do not lose me. You never did. You frightened me, yes, but even then I think I was already yours." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of all the moments, all the small catalysts that had brought them here. The fevered nights, the ballroom whispers, the ruined plant, the rain. All of it culminating in this. He bent his head, not hastily, not with the hesitation of a man bound by pride. He kissed her then, fully, with the certainty of one who no longer doubted what he wanted. Her lips parted at once, welcoming, answering, the kiss sealing not only passion but peace. When they drew apart, his forehead rested against hers, his breath unsteady. "You are my lion tamer," he whispered, half wry, half solemn. "And you," she replied, smiling through tears, "are the sparrow who learned to fly, after all." He laughed softly, the sound rich with relief and wonder, and pulled her into his arms. She leaned into him, unashamed, certain at last that she was wanted not for her dowry, not for duty, but for herself. Outside the rain eased and the night grew clear. The city that had once judged them would wake tomorrow to fresh rumors about the Duke's devotion, the Duchess's triumph, Faith's new independence. But within the house, none of that mattered. What mattered was this, that Hope Hackerfick once the unwanted bride, had become the heart of the Duke's world, and that Lorenzo Lang, once the cold and solitary lion, had learned that freedom was not in walking alone, but in choosing to stand still with the one he loved.